A lot of our clients, and I'm sure other people, are finding themselves very confused when trying to transition from Universal Analytics to Google Analytics 4 or GA4. The reason being, everyone's used to Universal Analytics, the metrics, the dimensions, where to find things, custom reports, and just haven't spent enough time really diving deep into the GA4 platform. But that's what this video is for. I'm Allie. I am a paid media supervisor at Synapse SEM, and I spearhead a lot of the reporting and GA4 migration initiatives. So today we'll be looking through a GA4 sample account. This is a dummy data account that is provided by Google. You can also download this if you want to just play around with some of the metrics. Look at some settings, some common analyses like landing page or session by channel. Then we'll go through some of the predefined reports, how to create a custom report or what is now called an explore report, and then again some of the admin settings. So let's get into it. This is the overall dashboard. There are several what they're called cards from Google Analytics. Just a couple of basic things here along with recently accessed reports. So if you go to the same exact thing every time, it should be linked here. And then some other suggested reports that Google has provided here. Not too much else here, so let's jump into the reports section. And here's where we're going to get a lot of your other data. So here it's very visual. There's a lot of bar charts, line charts, etc., and a lot of different things here. Usually you can click on the link at the bottom. It'll bring you to that same report, but larger with more data. So if you want to use this as a starting point, you're more than welcome. Otherwise, I typically just jump into some of the other reports over here. But before we go down there, real-time data, very similar to Universal Analytics. It's showing who's on your site currently and how they're interacting with your site. And then we get into the collections, as they're called. This is the lifestyle collection. Then we have a user collection. Under lifestyle is acquisition. For every single main menu item over here, there's going to be an overview, which again is filled with these cards, as they're called. It's supposed to be more visual. If you click again the link here, it will bring you to another report below it. Then we have user acquisition and traffic acquisition. The main difference here being for user acquisition, the main primary dimension here is all user-based, whereas traffic acquisition is all session-based. So slight difference there, but overall, all the metrics should be the same. Similar to Universal Analytics, there is a primary dimension. For these reports, there's only a certain amount of primary dimensions that are available to us. So here we get to choose from all of the session dimensions, and then we can add in a secondary dimension for whatever we want. So if we want to add in region, we can do that. Now let's say we want to filter the report for just direct traffic. If we go up top to add filter, and then go here, session default channel group, contains direct, and it is case sensitive. So if I try this with a lowercase d and click apply, you'll notice that there's no data available, even though it is direct. So just make sure that you are following the case structure. So click apply. Now we're just looking at direct traffic by region. And then we have all of the predefined metrics here, which we can change, and I'll show you how to do that in a bit. I will be switching between this dummy data and the Synapse GA4 account just because I do not have admin access to the dummy data because it is Google owned, but I do have admin access to our account. So there's certain things you need certain access levels for. So I will be switching back and forth. And this is a good time for that because I'm going to show you how to download the data. You'll notice here I have shared this report, but there's just share link. If I go over to the Synapse report, give it a second while it loads here, I now can click share and then download. A main positive of GA4 is you can download all of your data at once versus having to download the first 5,000 rows and then do it again and do it again until you get everything. So that is definitely a positive. I recommend just downloading a CSV and then you can manipulate it after you've downloaded that data. So let me jump back over to the dummy data. A couple other things to point out here. Here's where you change the date range. similar, pretty self-explanatory. You can add in comparisons as well. So all users versus organic users, for example, similar to Universal Analytics. And then one thing to point out here is this triangle. So if you click it, it shows that this data is not sampled, but it is impacted by thresholding, which just means that Google is masking the data to protect user privacy, which is a big thing with the new Google Analytics 4. They're really trying to cater to other countries where maybe privacy is a bit more strict than here. But overall, thresholding is something to be mindful of, just because it means that the data below is not 100% accurate. It is just directionally accurate. There is a setting you can change to make sure that this is not impacted by thresholding, which I will show you how to do in the other account. But just wanted to call that to your attention before you try downloading things and making decisions off of it, and then realize after the fact that it is not fully accurate. All right, so moving down the list here, the next section here is just engagement. Very similar again to Universal Analytics, where you can find data for events, conversions, pages. You'll notice it says pages and screens. The screens is just relevant if you also have an app connected to your Google Analytics property. Historically, with Universal, it had to be separate, your app versus your website. If you only have a website, it's only going to show your page, not your screen class. So even though it says screen class, you can ignore that part. It's just going to show you page performance. And then similarly, we have landing page performance. So this is a common thing that people look at. What landing pages are people getting to your site via? You can add secondary dimensions. You cannot change the primary dimension because it's supposed to be landing page, but you can add several other things over here. All right. And then this next section over here, monetization, this is really your e-commerce hub. If you are an e-commerce client or company, this is where you're going to go to see all that data. If you are not, I recommend just removing it totally so it's not taking up space over here, which again, I can show you how to do in my Synapse Analytics account, which I will do momentarily. And there's a couple other things over here. So we have user attributes for things like demographics, and then tech for things like operating system and browser. All right, so let me just hop over to the Synapse account over here. Let's move myself over here. All right, so all of this is the same. This is the basic or default setup for Google Analytics 4 account, but you'll notice that there's this library section down here. If I click that, it's going to bring up all of these individual reports, but they're labeled out specifically. So you'll notice that collections, I mentioned that word before, is all of these. So like lifestyle is a collection, and you can notice that it's published. Business objectives is not published, therefore you cannot see it on the side over here. User is published, and therefore you can see it on the side. So just to show you what that means, you can add reports to collections, you can subtract reports from collections. For this purpose, monetization does not apply to Synapse. We are not an e-commerce business. So I'm just going to remove monetization, which you can do that by scrolling down and finding it. You can click on it from up here if you click Edit Collection, and then it will go to all of the reports within the collection. I'm just going to remove monetization and click Save. All right, then go back. And now you'll notice that monetization is no longer showing up here. I can also, let's say, for example, I want to look at my traffic acquisition report. I can edit the default metrics that come up in this report. So I clicked edit here. Let's say users is important to me, sessions is important to me, but I don't really care about engaged sessions. I can scroll over here on the side, click on metrics, and get rid of engaged sessions. I could add in rate. I can get rid of events per session. I can do whatever I want to make sure that this is catered to what I typically look at. I will say that this change will be made for everyone who has access to this property. So don't go making a bunch of changes. Make sure that it's clear to everyone else who has access so that you're not getting rid of something that someone else uses frequently. All right, so I saved that. You can change dimensions. You can change what's showing up here for the visual. I'm not going to do that right now, but this is where you do that. So I'm going to click back. I'm not going to change any of those others, save any of those other changes I made. But awesome, that's how you customize all of these preset reports over here. Next thing I want to go through is Explore reports. All right, to look at an Explore report, click here on Explore. Again, this is the new version of a custom report. So I'm in the Synapse report right now. I'm actually going to go over to the dummy account just because there's a little bit more data to work with here. And you can see these are reports that other people have created and shared. I'm going to click on blank. There's also a couple templates here, but usually you have to change the fields anyway. So I'm just going to start with a blank report. And to show you a little bit of what this is, here is where you title your report, date range. You can create segments or audiences right from here if you'd like to. You have to add all of your dimensions and metrics into this variables column. Then you drag them over to settings and then they populate the report on the right. So let's do that here. Let's add in session default channel group, landing page, and event name. So you see they populate over here, but nothing changes my report. For metrics, let's add users. I'll do total and active, and I'll explain the difference there. Sessions, and let's do event count and conversions. All right, so now we have plenty of metrics and dimensions here. I did just mention there's a difference between total users and active users. That's one main difference between Universal Analytics and Google Analytics 4. So active users are users who did not bounce, similar to an engaged user. And the difference between a bounce in Universal and GA4 is a little bit different. So there's a bit more leniency there. In order to be an engaged user or an active user, you have to be on the site for at least 10 seconds or visit 2 pages or convert. If you do not do any of those things or meet that criteria, then you bounce. So for example, if you are on the site for 9 seconds, you scroll down the page, then you leave, you're still a bounce even though you're on that page for 9 seconds. So that's a little bit of a difference in how they're calculated between Universal and GA4. So if you're looking at rates between your old instance and your new instance, they're going to be different. On the flip side of that, there's something called engagement rate for GA4. It is the exact inverse of bounce rate. So how many people were engaged versus how many people bounced. So that's one thing. If you just want to have one metric, you can take the inverse to get the other. Now let's go back to this Explore report. You can either drag and drop over here, meaning I'll drag this over here. And that did not work. There we go. Or you can click and it will give you the options of what you already brought in under variables. So I'm going to add in landing page, and then I'm going to scroll down to values. I'm going to add in total users. I'm going to add in sessions. And let's see, I'll add in conversions as well. You notice that there are bars in here, and if I scroll down in settings, you can see that the cell type is bar chart. You can remove that. You can have plain text, or you can have a heat map. So it'll be a bit more visual for you to have your eyes narrow in on what's important here. You'll also notice there's only 10 rows here. So you have to make sure that you are bringing in more if you have more. Show rows, you can do 500, that's the max. You can keep it at 10, that's as far down as you're going to be able to scroll. All right, And then I'm gonna bring it back to 10 or 25 just for sake of loading. Nested rows, you can change this to yes, which means that we're not gonna repeat direct for each one of these. Everything over here is under direct. You can change that back. For column numbers, you can start it with a different number if you'd like. To show column groups, if you have several here, you might have to increase this number, but we only have 3: users, sessions, and conversions. And then you can add filters down here as well. Again, you need to have these filtered rows, whether it's a metric or dimension, already brought in under your variables. So let's say we want to filter for default channel group contains direct. Again, it is case sensitive, but it should pop up if you start typing. So click apply. And not everything over here is direct traffic. You do not need to keep direct here as a primary dimension. So let's say you want landing page and you want it to be direct, but you don't want to have direct always showing. You can remove this, but it's still filtering for direct traffic. All right. You can also, let's say I don't want conversions, I don't want users, I do want event count, and I want to see all the different events that I have in here already. So under columns, I'm going to add event name. And now these are all of the events that I have added. And again, there's only 5 here because I'm only bringing in 5 columns. If I bring in more, it'll add more events, and you can scroll over. And then you can filter for the events that you want. For example, maybe you only want to show a couple of these, then you can filter here just to show the events that you care about. But that's how you see performance by specific events. You can name this tab, create another one, duplicate it. You can name the whole Explore report. If you go out of the report, it will save automatically. I did not title it, so it's saved as untitled. You can also notice here, there's one person here. If you want to share it with other people, you just click this button here and click share. It's grayed out because I do not have permissions in this account. If you do share it, it will show up for everyone else like this with 2 people. I will say though, if I click into one that this other person made, it is read-only access. So if I want to manipulate this myself and use this as a starting point, I need to save it myself as something else. And then I can change things like the date range or move around the rows, for example. All right, now that we went through that, there's one other Explore report I want to go through quickly, path exploration. So let's say, and this again is templated, so there's already some things brought in here as suggestions, but you can start over, which I recommend doing on this start over button. You can select an ending point and then see how the user got there, which is really interesting. So I'm going to select an ending point of, oops. Let's see. I want to see when the top spenders, let's see. And then you can see the pages prior to that. It defaulted to event name, but I can change this to, let's see, page title, for example. And it will change here. So this is really interesting to play around with. Of course, there's lots of different things you can play with, but I recommend starting it or opening the template, starting over, and then playing around with specific events. You can filter and go from there just to see how people convert, whether it's filling out your main form on your site and seeing what pages people come from to get there. That's how you would see that. So I think that's a good overview of an Explore report. Again, there's a lot of things to play with here, so I recommend just kind of getting in here and playing around with some of the data. The last thing over here I want to bring your attention to is this advertising section. All right, so advertising is pretty cool. You can see in channel overview. So this is pretty self-explanatory here, but we also have the model comparison tool, which is a bit more robust than universal analytics. You can compare different attribution models and see how things like conversions and revenue change. You can change your primary dimension. You can add a secondary dimension. You can add filters up here at the top. You can download it. You can share it with someone else. So there's a lot of things to play around with here. And then you can also look at conversion paths. So you can see what percent are early touch points, late touch points. I will mention that a late touch point also is someone who only had one touch point and then converted. So you'd have to take it directionally, but this is really interesting if you want to see how often people have multiple touch points before converting, if most of your people tend to convert on their initial touch, but there's a lot of data here as well. All right, so for the next part, I'm going to dive into some of the admin settings where you're going to find things like conversions, audiences, certain just settings in general for your property. For this, I'm going to switch over to Synapse just because I don't have many permissions within this demo account. But over here, there's a lot of things we can look at. Main thing to right off the bat is we have account, we have property. There's no views in GA4, so there's not that third column that we would see for a universal account. A couple things that we do see if we have admin access, you can see change history. So when someone changes a setting, adds a new event, gives access to someone else, you can see the history of that here. If there's any filters added, account access, some generic things like that. Then in property settings, up top, there's Setup Assistant. I don't know how long this will be around for. It's mostly for just the migration from Universal Analytics to GA4, but there's a couple things in here that you can look at and make sure things are set up correctly. I would assume that this will go away eventually, so this may not exist forever, but if you're trying to just see, am I set up correctly? Are things done? It will tell you if you are not complete. Sometimes you have done the things and you just have to go over here and say mark as complete. I already did that for all of these, so there's no need here. But if they weren't marked as complete, this would not be fully green here. So if you want to link to Google Ads or set up conversions, for example, you can click on them here, or you can find them in the settings on the side. So that is the Setup Assistant. Property settings, pretty self-explanatory here. You can have your property ID, otherwise you shouldn't have to do too much here. Similar to data streams, here's where you can get your measurement ID. This is your new Google Analytics 4 account number. This is what you would use, for example, if you are creating conversions in Tag Manager and you need that measurement ID. This is where you would grab that from. Events. We're not going to go through how to create an event for the purposes of this. It's a little bit too technical, but this is where you could create all of these events. One thing to note, everything in Google Analytics 4 is an event. That is very different from GA3 or Universal Analytics, where you would have events and you would have conversions, and then you would just have general page performance. Everything is an event to start, and then you can mark it as a conversion. One main benefit of marking it as a conversion is you can import it into Google Ads. If it is not marked, you cannot import it. You can also filter for event name that is a conversion. So when we were creating an Explorer report, you can add a filter for is conversion event equals true, and then it'll only bring in the event names that you have marked as a conversion. Once you have marked something here as a conversion, it will populate in this conversion side once it has received a conversion. If it has not yet received a conversion, you can just click Create Conversion Event, type in the exact name, and force it to show up sooner rather than later. But that's where that will show up. One thing to note on this side, purchase is default. It's on every single GA4 property. If it doesn't apply to you, you can just ignore it, but it's just going to be there. You see this little icon here. This is the counting method. So One thing about conversions in GA4 is if it's a form, for example, and someone submits it twice, but it's really just one lead, one user, it will count 2 conversions. So if you're using the conversion column or the event count column, it may double count. If you have e-commerce, for example, sometimes you want it because sometimes someone buys something then buys something else. So you want those double or duplicate conversions. But if it's a form fill for an ebook, for example, you probably only want to count that one conversion. So here is a change that we have made. If you click the dots here and say change counting method, you can change it to once per session instead of once per event. Once per event probably will double count a little bit. Once per session will just count one event per that session. So we've changed those here so that we can accurately use columns like event count and conversion instead of using sessions where an event occurred. Moving down here to audiences, this is where you would create an audience. Exact same, mostly format for audience creation as it was back in Universal Analytics. You just create a new audience here, and then you follow the prompts just to create a new audience. Custom definitions, we have a couple for Synapse here, but you can create any that are pertinent to your own company. Data settings, one thing I do want to call your attention to is data retention. This is very important. The default here is 2 months, meaning that Google will store your data for 2 months, and after that, it's no longer there. You can change this to 14 months, which I highly recommend doing, at least double checking that it's already changed in your account, no matter if you set it up or not. Otherwise, you will only have 2 months of data. If you are a 360 customer, you can have more than 14 months stored, but if you're just a normal Google Analytics customer, you can save up to 14 months. So I, again, highly recommend checking that. You can have filters, you can import data. The next thing that I definitely want to go over is reporting identity. If you remember at the beginning when I mentioned the data that was impacted by thresholding, and I said there was a setting you could change to get around that, this is where you do that. Blended is the default here. If I click show all and change to device-based and then save, the data that was previously impacted by thresholding will no longer be impacted. Changing the setting will not negatively impact your account, but you won't be able to record things such as demographic information. So if you want to download accurate data, I recommend coming in here to reporting identity, clicking on device space, saving it, going back to whatever you were trying to download, whether it was an Explore report or landing page by channel, for example, downloading that data, then coming back, switching it back to blended, and then getting out of here. But that's where you would get around thresholding as an issue. You can check on your attribution settings. Data-driven is the default here. We haven't changed that. And then lastly, here's where you will link to things such as Google Ads or SA360, Search Console, which is just bringing in more data to your Google Analytics platform. One last thing that I realized I did skip over was Google Signals. So back in reporting identity, and we switch over to device-based, this is really for users who want to bring data into Google Ads, for example. If you want to bring in your conversions and your audiences accurately, you need to have something on or toggled on within the settings that will allow you to do that. Otherwise, you cannot bring in those audiences correctly. If you do not have Google Ads or you don't care about demographic information, you don't have to turn this on at all. But if you go up to Setting Assistant and scroll down, turn on Google Signals. That is what I was talking about. So if you click this and click Manage Google Signals, you'll have to click Get Started here, and that's what that setting is. Again, if you want to bring in audiences to Google Ads for remarketing purposes, display campaign purposes, etc., add to your campaigns in observation mode, whatever it might be, you have to turn this on in order to get those audiences to import into Google Ads. Again, if you don't care about that, you do not have to turn it on. It is not required, but that is where you would turn that on. You also would have to toggle this on as well. You can see that we don't have it turned on for Synapse, but we also don't have Google Ads campaigns running currently. So it's not super important for us at the moment, but for a lot of our clients, we do have it turned on, and that's where you're going to run into a lot of thresholding issues. So I just wanted to make sure I called that out. But overall, I think we did a very high-level overview of Google Analytics 4. There is definitely a lot more that you can dive into, whether it be an Explore report or making more customizations in regular reports. But definitely feel free to reach out to us if you want anything in more detail, or if you need any help setting up events, whether it be in Google Analytics 4 or Tag Manager, and we can help.